Hey kids, cook real food. Katie Kimball here for the Healthy Parenting Connector. And I am so honored, beyond blessed to be hosting Dr. Katja Rowell today, because we are in the midst of an epidemic of picky eating. It's been going on for a few decades. It got worse in the pandemic. Parents need this information. And so today we're going to talk mostly about extreme picky eating, those 5 food kids, those 20 food kids, and honestly, why some therapy actually makes it worse. Not to stick to the negative side, because we're going to tell you what you can do. But my goodness, thank you so much for being here, Dr. Katja.
Oh, I'm excited. Thanks for having me.
So the official introduction, so that my audience knows who you are. Dr. Katja Rowell is an MD. She's a graduate of the University of Michigan Medical School, Michigan, my home state. And she's been a family physician in urban, rural, university student health settings, breadth of experience. And during that time of practice, she was struck by this prevalence of disordered eating and feeding, and then the health problems that fell from that. Dr. Rowell believes that establishing a healthy feeding relationship, in essence, how children are fed, it's the missing piece in addressing this disordered eating and weight dysregulation, right? Like, not that weight is everything, but there's a cascading health effect here. Dr. Rowell is described as academic, but warm and down to earth. And she teaches the importance of a healthy feeding relationship to healthcare providers. I cannot understate how important that is. She teaches family therapists, childcare staff, and consults with corporate clients, nutrition education, and public health providers. She's got 2 books out, and her second book, Helping Your Child, 3 books out. That wasn't in your bio, no fair. She's got 3.
I'm sorry.
She's got 3 books out.
Yes. That's why I'm updating my website. It's been a while, so yes.
And Dr. Rowell, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're known as the feeding doctor.
Yes.
Yes, because not enough doctors help parents know how to feed their kids.
Oh,
right?
It's terrible. Yeah.
So we're just gonna jump right in. No more bio. That's where we got to start, because we know that MDs. I was just told the other day by an MD that she had 17 hours in her entire training in diet, nutrition, and food combined. Okay, that's probably not enough.
More than I had.
More than you had. Well,
Yeah.
She's an overachiever. I mean, there's clearly not enough, considering food is fuel for our entire lives, our entire basis of health. How did you go from being an MD to becoming a picky eating expert?
Yeah, so, I think this is such an important point to know, because the first people that parents go to when they're struggling is the family doctor, the pediatrician, the nurse practitioner. And it's really important. And I feel like I can call my colleagues out. It's not for lack of wanting to help. It's just ignorance and a lack of training. And
Yeah.
I had, U of M Medical School is a great school. I had 1 hour on nutrition, and it was like, get your fat-free cheese, right? Because this was 25 years ago, whenever that was. And it was like, here's fat-free Kraft cheese, and here's a can of low sodium soup. And we had, 1 lecture in residency on breastfeeding. And so I think it's getting better, but yeah, there's very little information about nutrition, and even less about the psychology, about the how. And I actually think that's more important. That's why I'm here. We all kind of know what we should be feeding our kids, and how we should be eating and enjoying variety, and that's really the key to good nutrition. But what we really struggle with is, how do we make that happen? And my journey, I'm embarrassed to say, I was giving feeding advice in primary care when I wasn't trained to do so. And I know that I gave some bad advice, and that's hard to kind of reckon with as a helper. And I didn't really learn about this until I had my own daughter. And that's a hard thing to admit, but I had a daughter who was 9 pounds, 11 ounces after an uncomplicated delivery. And this was right when the panic about childhood obesity, and I don't like using that word because it's so stigmatizing, started. And so I really was struggling with, how do I feed my daughter so she doesn't struggle with weight and doesn't have an eating disorder, having worked in college health. And so it was from my own experience, and I ended up having a food preoccupied toddler because I was trying to feed her from a place of fear and anxiety and prevention of, I'm trying to prevent weight issues, or, and when we feed from a place of anxiety, fear, avoidance, things don't tend to go well. And so I just happened to find Ellen Satter's work and Child of Mine, the book, and I instituted the division of responsibility. And it was like so transformational and so quickly. And it was this sort of aha moment that, my worry went down, my confidence, feeding her. I started to see her skills emerging that I'd been messing with. And so I just had to learn more. So I dove into training. I actually worked with Ellen Satter's group for a couple of years. And just then expanded my education, reached out and trained with speech pathologists, occupational therapists, psychologists, and now there's a big team of us really doing some exciting work around responsive feeding therapies. So yeah, the journey, unfortunately, I have to admit, was kind of personal before I really looked at what I was doing, and that some of what I was doing wasn't helping. So yeah, it's personal and professional for me.
Mm-hmm. Well, my heart is full imagining this team of people coming together and all the additional training you did with the background, obviously, and the technique of knowing medicine, right, of being an MD. But oh, Dr. Rowell, like my heart just dropped thinking about you as a young first-time mom. And I'm like, what? And worrying about the fact that the culture and the narrative of the time made you worry about obesity with your cute little chunky baby with the little twist off wrists that I just want to pinch your cheeks, right? Like we know now that that's great. That's beautiful and has nothing to do with future.
Well, not everybody knows that. Yeah, I have to say that that's not the norm. And this is the thing with like diet culture and the panic around obesity. I've worked with families of exclusively breastfed infants, like 4-month-old infants, where the pediatricians looked at the growth charts and said, oh, this baby is obese, and you have to now cut out nighttime feedings, right? And that was the advice, was to try to get a breastfed, functional breastfeeding dyad to eat less because they're obese. And so this is where the paranoia, the fear, the anxiety, the misunderstanding of what growth is, misunderstanding that children come in a range of sizes. It's like this growth chart cutoffs that are so arbitrary and that have changed over the years, right? So my child was obese, from birth until about age 4, and then just started to, kind of get taller and growth changed. And these labels, underweight, obesity, overweight, failure to thrive, these labels, when they're misinterpreted, which I see all the time from physicians included, leads to so much anxiety and worry, and that interferes with feeding. I didn't trust my big daughter with a healthy appetite and a joy with food. That scared me. I thought, this is bad. I have to do something. And I see the same thing with my clients of smaller than average kids, where the pediatrician says, oh, they're underweight. And in fact, they're just growing at a healthy rate for them. They're just smaller than average or leaner than average. And so these misunderstandings about growth and that kids come in this beautiful range of sizes means that we're interfering inappropriately. We're feeding from a place of worry. It's backfiring. And then we see more kids who are not growing the way nature intended. They're either bigger or smaller, and their relationship with food can get really emotionally charged and really messed up. And our relationship with them around food can be all consuming. I know when I was struggling with it, I thought about it so much. And I hear this from parents all the time of these small kids or bigger kids who are like, I've been told I have to get them to eat more or less, and we're just battling and it's not working.
Well, I appreciate your honesty. I appreciate your willingness to, admit that you came from a place of fear and a place of misunderstanding, and to be an MD and to say about other doctors, what, this isn't right. This isn't right. This isn't working. This is not serving anyone. And so we all appreciate that. And it just, it breaks my heart. I am a mother of one who's in the tiniest percentiles too. And so I completely empathize with the parents who are worried and thinking about food. It's really tricky. So we have to get to diet culture. We're going to do that a little later, but we can't not talk about it, even though we're supposed to be talking about extreme picky eating. So let's, we'll start there. Let's define extreme picky eating so that we're all on the same page. And then, has picky eating increased in the last few decades as you've been doing this work?
Yeah, so I I tend to view it, and there's some research that suggests that this exists on a spectrum, right? So we have typical eaters, typical picky eaters, maybe a little more picky, and then we have even up to, feeding and eating disorders.
Right.
And so, I think of typical picky eating, that's about half of all kids. And this is not just America. This is one thing I want to point out. It's like, oh, spoiled American kids. And, actually there's research from Denmark and other countries that about 50% of kids become picky or choosy.
Okay.
And that happens usually after about a year and a half, 15, 18 months. So the kiddo who is eating everything suddenly now is more choosy, and they might toss the things they don't want to eat. They want their preferred foods, which tend to be, easy to like foods. So typical picky eaters will generally eat from all of the food groups over the course of a day or the course of a few days. It's very typical for picky eaters to just eat one thing. So you might have 3 or 4 offerings, and all they eat one meal is little pieces of clementine oranges. And then the next meal, all they eat is scrambled eggs. And then the next meal, it's just chicken nuggets. That's very typical. And so one of the biggest pieces of picky eating is just understanding what's typical and not fighting it, and how do we roll with it so we don't make it worse. And not trying to make every meal like perfect my plate, So that's typical picky eating. They usually can make do, so they might have an age appropriate, protest if you made brown rice instead of white rice, and they might get annoyed, but they calm themselves down, and then they'll eat some banana or whatever else there is. Now, more along that spectrum where we get to the extreme or the more avoidant or anxious eating, we tend to see them often be kiddos who've struggled since really early. It's very common, like, I've had problems since breastfeeding or since the first days, or we couldn't even transition from breast or bottle to solid foods at 6 months or at 10 months, or things were growing great, and then at 10 months we got into these epic battles and it just spiraled, and now they only eat 15 things. We often see it associated with more sensitive or anxious temperaments. We know it's associated with more pressured and kind of coercive and with food battles. It's more common with sensory challenges and with neurodiversity. So autistic children are more likely to be on the more avoidant and anxious side. And I basically sum it up, and my co-author and I for our book, and she's a speech pathologist running a feeding clinic, it's if your child eats so little variety or amount that it's interfering with, going to sleepovers, their social life, their physical development, and this is the piece where I think we differ quite a bit, or you, the parent, are really worried about it, you're spending a lot of emotional energy, or there's a lot of conflict and emotion around it, that family needs help. Even if the child eats actually more of a typical picky eater picture and they're not really in trouble with nutrition, if the parents are struggling, they need support, because that can get worse.
You just said you disagree with your co-author?
No. I'm sorry.
Okay.
My co-author and I have added that piece of the parent experience. So most of the time when you read about, problem feeders or extreme picky eaters, it's like they eat 20 or fewer foods. It often has sort of number cutoffs, and those are helpful things. But I've worked with kids who've eaten 50, 60 foods, lots of good nutritional value, but they're having panic attacks and can't go out to eat at a restaurant. So that emotional piece is important as well. And the piece that we've added that we really think is important to focus on, which is part of this responsive feeding or responsive feeding therapy, is the parent and child feeding relationship is critical. Involving the parent is so important, because some feeding therapies, it's like, you drop your kid off with us for 1 or 2 hours a week, we're going to do sensory play, and then that will fix the sensory problem in the child. And that's just not how it works. No matter what gets children into feeding challenges, whether there are sensory or oral motor problems, or maybe they had some pain at some point, if they've had problems with reflux or things were uncomfortable or difficult to eat. That's another thing I should have mentioned, is that avoidant eating, often there's been a history of something didn't feel good or something wasn't going well with early eating, or with, constipation, or who knows what it was. And so no matter what gets kids into feeding problems, that relationship dynamic often, gets off kilter when they didn't eat because it hurt and then parents were frantic and so maybe pushed a little bit or a doctor told them to. And so it's so important, no matter what else is going on, even if there are sensory, oral, motor, other issues that we're addressing, it's so important that parents get support in terms of healthy feeding relationship.
And I love that you focus on the relationships. I mean, your definition of if your eating is interfering with your life, or if it's interfering with your relationship between parent and child, and that's become unstable, then you need help. I mean, that's so simple and easy. And so lots of feeding therapies are maybe not the best when it comes to relationships, but you promote responsive feeding. So tell us the important basics of that way of helping kids learn to eat.
Yeah, I just love the language around responsive feeding. I was trained in and still use, and most of my work was based on Alan Satter's work, right? Division of responsibility. So that's a big part of this for me. And so, at the base of it is this idea that, humans, even with sensory challenges, right? Even with oral motor challenges, we're born with these capabilities and these skills, and a responsive feeding approach supports that. It's the scaffolding, it's facilitating, it's helping those inborn skills of curiosity, hunger, those internal motivators like hunger and fullness. And the child wants to have a wonderful relationship with the parent. They want autonomy, right? The I do it. So we work with development. What is typical development of children? We don't want to be fighting that. We don't want to be, trying to get children to eat or to play with food, because oftentimes they'll push back and it backfires. And so responsive feeding is really relationship focused, and it's about what happens when we as the parents put food on the table. How is the child responding? What cues are they telling us? Is the infant pushing away and crying? Are they tossing everything? And so what we really are doing with response feeding is helping parents to read those cues, to interpret those cues, and then how do we respond in a really emotionally supportive, warm way.
I love that. So it's about listening to the child, trusting that there's some innate knowledge there. There's an innate understanding, right, of how we should relate to food and how we should relate to each other. You mentioned a little bit about forms of feeding therapy that aren't as effective. Parents getting advice from their pediatricians. Is it just sort of a neutral playing field in non-responsive feeding therapy, or can some bad feeding therapy actually exacerbate the problem?
Yeah, I absolutely observe and work with families. Most of the families I've worked with have failed feeding therapy. So I have a bias, I'm sure, with my population are the ones where it didn't work, right? But I'm pretty, I think that if we are, and I, content warning here, some of the feeding therapies that use punishments and reward and compliance, where children are held down and strapped down. I mean, some of it's really hard to believe that this is happening. And when you read the papers that, some of the techniques, if the child isn't opening their mouth for food, they will physically open the mouth. They're wedging toothbrushes and, they're, when children, sorry, everybody, if you're eating, stop eating right now. But when children vomit or gag in therapy, they actually are refeeding the vomit, what they've spit up to children. It's actually, to me, it's not trauma informed. There's a real potential to do harm. And I've interviewed adults who have gone through that kind of feeding therapy. We know that kind of therapy is associated with PTSD, and autistic adults are really sort of pushing back. So another thing I want to put out there is if a feeding therapy is hard for you to watch as a parent, often in those situations too, you're not allowed to be with your child. I've had parents who said they took my 3-year-old and I could hear them screaming in the back. And when I said, I really want to be with my 3-year-old, And, well, then you're non-compliant. We aren't going to work with you. So there are like, trust the relationship and the nurturing and the love. And if your child is screaming to be dragged into feeding therapy, or I've had 9-year-olds who are vomiting in the car before therapy, they're so anxious. I think that there are therapies that, as one mom said, bad therapy is worse than no therapy. And I've worked with parents and children who say they have PTSD from these experiences. So trust that, right? So there's that extreme. And then also, though, I want to say that some of these compliance-based therapies are done with a smile, and there's fun music in the background, and it feels playful. We're just asking them to kiss or to play with the food. But if the child is anxious, they're not enjoying being there, and we can tell, right? We know when our kids are into something or not. I feel that isn't helping, and so anytime it's increasing the child's anxiety or your anxiety or increasing power struggles. So if you're asked to do, therapy tasks at home where you're battling for 45 minutes on spit bowls, or you're trying to get them to kiss the food and they're screaming for 45 minutes, or they're supposed to eat a bite of non-preferred food before preferred food, and that's leading to battles or children gagging at the table, it's not helping. And there are other ways to address it.
Well, that is all very important for parents to remember. And I kind of have the heebie-jeebies and the creepy crawlies because I didn't actually know how. Trust your gut, parents, trust your gut. And really, Dr. Rowell just gave us a great prescription for what works and what doesn't, right? If it's causing a power struggle, that's a great litmus test. If it's causing a power struggle, it's probably not serving your child to improve their relationship with food. Right. So, and I think a lot of parents make many mistakes when it comes to power struggles, but also with bribery and desserts. So let's talk about why that should probably be in the no category instead of the yes category.
Right. So handling desserts and sweets is so tricky, but we have research that shows us that when we bribe with dessert, when there's the negotiating, all the power struggles, we teach them to overvalue the sweet foods or the forbidden foods. And, it makes sense if we think about it just from psychology terms. If eating the real food, the growing food, the healthy food, if it's a slog and we're bribing and the emotion around it is often really negative, you just have to eat 2 more bites and nobody's having fun and they're whining. And then, okay, I had 1 bite and now can I have dessert? Okay, now you can have dessert. And then suddenly the dessert comes out and now everyone's, relieved, oh, we made it to dessert. So we're also then attaching different emotions to the sweets and the desserts. And so that backfires. And so if that's the experience of people listening, the most powerful things to help neutralize the sweets and that what feels like almost addictive properties, sweets are not addictive. When we give permission, when we teach them how to incorporate them, when we have all foods being neutral, it just becomes another part of what we're eating. And of course they're kids, and so they will enjoy sweets and there will be more energy around them, but we also see them willingly eating other foods and having more variety. So the 2 things that have been most helpful to neutralize the sweets and the negotiating the battles for clients is serving family style. So you put your plate out, you serve your different offerings, and then a small or a portion of dessert is served with it. So it might be the homemade, peach cobbler, or a couple of Oreos, or a, homemade smoothie popsicle, whatever that sweet is, it goes with the meal. And so immediately they come to the table, they're not looking at, pieces of broccoli on their plate that makes them want to gag. They're not immediately saying, how many bites of this do I have to eat? I don't like that. That's touching that. I didn't want that. So when we come to the table with the empty plate, the dessert, we don't have to immediately engage in battles and negotiating and anxiety and upset, which interferes with all the good stuff and skills we want. So they will eat dessert first for a while. but it's so powerful. And I watched this with my toddler, like licking the popsicle, then she'd put it down and then she'd eat some chicken and other stuff. And we got to the point where like desserts were melting during meals. So I'd say, do you want me to put that in the freezer till you finish? And, and then the thing that really blows their minds, like, oh, you did, if you're full and you see them sort of getting full on their ice cream, let's put it in the freezer and you can have it with breakfast tomorrow. It's like, what? And so what we're doing is taking away the scarcity effect and all the shame and all the excitement over those formerly forbidden foods. That can be really, really powerful. So serving the dessert with the meal and family style, all my clients are, well, not all, but for the majority, those are the two things that bring down the power struggle and conflict and allow for connection and for those inborn skills to emerge.
Yeah, and if the litmus test is negotiating means it's a bad strategy, that probably means our one dessert a day is a bad strategy. Because although my older 3 seem fine with it, although I'm pretty sure my teenager eats whatever he wants when he's out, the 6-year-old, it is a constant negotiation. Does this count as a dessert? Can I trade this in? Can I have a cookie with my ice cream? Is that one dessert? Is that 2? How big? How small? And it is kind of exhausting. So Katie, like that's the sign of a rule that's breaking.
It's probably not serving you. And these are really hard things to, I've been there where I'm like, there's anxiety, there's these power struggles. And I go through this with families. That's a really good sign of where I need to learn more because I'm fighting with my teenager over the takeout menu or whatever it is. So identifying points where you're frustrated and angry and where there's a lot of power struggle and negotiation and energy, that's often where it's like, I need to learn more or see about some new ideas on how to manage sweets and treats. And honestly, I have a kiddo who's 15 now. We didn't even do dessert till she was a toddler because I don't love sweets. I prefer salty foods. But once she was getting it out at friends' houses and started to see that interest, I'm like, we got to learn how to manage this. And it ebbs and flows. There have been times where she's been super interested in having sweets and treats. The one a day can be tricky because I've seen it with families where it sets kids up to lie. Because if they got that cupcake or they had chocolate milk at school, that counts as their, sweet thing for the day. And then they're lying about it. And that's upsetting to parents too. So all of those are clues of like, I got to dig more into learning about sweets and treats. And there are some days where my kiddo has 3 servings of sweet things. And then there are some days where it's far less. And this is probably the scariest thing right now because there's also so much about, sugar is addictive and sugar is the poison. Remember 20 years ago, fat was the demonized food thing. So anytime one nutrient or one food is really like set up as the root of all evil, I see that setting us up for problems with how we relate to that food. And so, it's really powerful when I liberalized access to sweets in terms of with meals and snacks. I always make sure it's also with something that's going to give long energy. So we serve it with fruit or with, milk or something that will not have that blood sugar spike and crash. I remember my kiddo coming back from a sleepover, maybe in 4th grade, and just walking in the door and being like, I need vegetables. And I just laughed because she's like, I haven't had a vegetable in 24 or whatever it was. And we just had this big, salad or whatever it was. And I know that she enjoyed the popcorn and the chocolate chip waffles or whatever was served at the sleepover. But I do believe that we as humans want to seek out variety. And when they stop feeling good eating that stuff and they're not engaged in the battles over getting it, they're much more likely to have that good relationship with food.
And it is all about relationships. So I find it really interesting that you talked about, you as the parent are knowing about blood sugar and balancing that short energy, quick energy of the, your refined carbohydrates and the longer energy of fat or protein. But you wouldn't teach that to the kids.
Right. I certainly would not do that until middle school at the earliest, because kids, and there are great resources online, because a lot of this stuff is now coming from schools, the online schools. Circle the good food, circle the bad food. And all of my eating disorder colleagues have, every one of them, when I do workshops too, it's like, how many of you have had kids where their eating disorders have started because of school nutrition messages? Every hand goes up, every single hand. And the last kiddo that I referred to, an eating disorder specialist, was an 11-year-old boy who'd had a 1 month no sugar challenge at school, and that just spiraled into a pretty scary, restrictive, almost anorexia picture. So these messages, the kids don't understand them. And I remember reading a New York Times article about, a little boy who said, I can't eat salt, my heart will explode. And I've heard these with clients of, oh boy, the first grade teacher said, don't have salt, or, they said sugar's bad for you. And they held up my daughter's fruit cup at school, but she just got off a feeding tube and that's the only fruit she's eating. And now she won't eat it because she thinks it's unhealthy. So I think that with nutrition sometimes, and I am such a talker, as you all can see, I'm such a teacher, like with my daughter, it was really hard to not want to teach nutrition, but it often messes up again with that experience of, I was just at a sleepover for 24 hours. I haven't had a vegetable. My body really wants vegetables right now. And we can interfere with that natural drive to have that variety. So yeah, I forgot even the original thread of the question, but it's really complicated. And generally, I think the less we talk about it, the better. It's our job as the parents to provide the food. So I'm not going to just serve, juice and fruit chews and that's it, and then just have sugar. So if we're having one of our sweet snacks, where occasionally kiddos also need to eat as much of the sweet as they want to, a couple times a week. So we'd make Rice Krispie treats. She'd come home from preschool or whatever it was, school. We'd say, okay, we're going to make Rice Krispie treats. I would serve it with a favorite fruit and some milk, and we'd sit down. And in the beginning, she ate a lot, but really fast, she would eat one piece, have some pear, have some milk, and be done. I, meanwhile, was not raised like that. I would, that was crap. That was forbidden. I couldn't eat that junk. I mean, I still would eat often, and I don't shame myself about it. I would eat half a pan of Rice Krispie treats, right? And so when I see her, that's what's so magical, is when we see with these kids, these skills emerge around eating, it's like, oh my goodness. And I wish I'd been fed that way, And so that, for me, over 10 years ago also was like, oh, I want to look at my own eating and my own eating competence. And so that can also be really inspiring for parents who themselves struggle with their relationship with food. Because the first time my kid handed me a half a cup of ice cream and said, I'm done, I mean, I was like, okay, if you can do it at 2 and 3, maybe I can relearn some of these skills too. So it's powerful
That's a good
stuff.
reminder. Yeah, and for kids, if it is a forbidden food or if it's a negotiable food, they're going to finish it no matter how full they are. I mean, I totally see how that would work.
Yes.
I know my husband would push back on you a little bit. He doesn't have a bad relationship with food at all, but he does have some actual physical health struggles that he believes. And I mean, we're gonna call sugar out on the carpet. He really believes that he had too much sugar and too much refined carbohydrates as a kid, that was a large proportion of his diet. And, he looks back and says, I don't fault my mom. Like the culture said, Kool-Aid's cheap and easy. Little Debbie is fun to put in every single lunchbox, and Ruffles potato chips, like that was the knowledge that she had at the time. But he says, gosh, if I could change one thing about my childhood, it would be to have had more vegetables and less sweets, because I feel like physical health wise, not habits around food, physical health wise, he feels he would be better off. So that's where, man, it gets so tricky. How do you talk to little children, at least, not middle school, high school, around food when you're out in the world and other people are trying to, feed your kids? How do you help them make good choices?
Yeah. And so I think that, again, especially with little kids, it's our job. So like if we were at the grocery store and they handed her a sucker, right, at checkout, I would say, I might have said, great, let's save this for later, right? If we're between meals and snacks, I don't want her to have a sucker necessarily. Or, if somebody has a cupcake and, they're celebrating or whatever, then that might be in, okay, so she had a cupcake at lunch, so dessert today is going to be a fruit, a homemade fruit smoothie, a popsicle, or whatever it is. So we think about what they're being offered, what they're eating, and balance it out. So when we ate out, I would say, generally I would ask her to choose either, you can order a dessert or you can order, lemonade. So I would, so yeah, I mean, so there are some things that we can help them balance out. And then eating out, man, that was always, the desserts that they have are the brownie, the dessert is this big. So I would often say, can we just have, 1 scoop of vanilla ice cream, please? Or can we have the kitty ice cream? And can we have it with the meal? You get a lot of pushback from the waiters on that often, if we ever get to the point where we're all eating out again. But so I think generally the less we talk about it, the better. So I might have said, okay, you're having a popsicle. Would you like oranges or pears with that? So we're adding to the choices, and we might give them some choices where we're trying to balance out what's being offered. We're going to the park to play, and so I'm going to bring my box of, whole grain crackers, maybe some whipped cream cheese, and a Tupperware where I pre-slice some pears, or I have a little paring knife with the cap. So it's still our job to think about the balance. Yeah, so I guess that's, what I would do, or I might have said to her, if she had candy somewhere, I might say, that's all quick energy. Do you want a cheese stick or some Go-Gurt so you have energy to play? So I might talk about it like that with them, but I'm not going to necessarily say, oh, that's sugar, that's too much sugar. It's just about how do we round out the choices and sort of balance throughout the day. It's a little bit more. And, and it's tough with your husband. It's so tricky because health has so many factors, and I don't know his history or whatnot, and certainly his experience with that. But we know that food and nutrition is about 20 some percent of adult health. And so this is the other thing. If you've got a really selective eater, there's that whole piece of the health pie that we often miss. So we know, even with, say, diabetes, we know that even if somebody isn't losing weight, we see improvement in their blood sugar control if they are doing gentle nutrition, where they're eating regularly, more balanced. They might be addressing disordered eating or eating disorders. We know that their blood sugar improves with activity, regardless of weight. And so some of what we've kind of said, obesity, like all of these health problems are associated. The most predictive factor is your zip code in terms of where you live. So one thing to think about is just, what kind of childhood people have in terms of trauma or homelessness or chaos, or food insecurity. That's a huge risk factor for eating disorders if kids didn't have enough food growing up. And so there are all these other, like loneliness is a huge factor for health. So even if our kids aren't eating a lot of broccoli and vegetables now, we can support their health by relationships, strong relationships, helping them have a sense of purpose. Maybe you can, build a little library or read to the dogs at the dog park, or find ways to volunteer, make cards for old folks in, senior living. So there are all these things around health, in addition to focusing on food, that we can do that sometimes helps take some of that anxiety off the table too.
Mm-hmm. And I think another way to get anxiety off the table is to leave the table. I'm a huge proponent of getting those kids in the kitchen preparing food. How do you see that component as playing a role in healing and in building a good relationship with food for your clients with extreme picky eaters?
Yeah. And all of them, but especially where there's anxiety, yes, cooking, being in the kitchen, anytime kids can do and feel competent and they're learning skills, that's fantastic. So growing food, having some herbs on that they can, pull the basil off, you pick strawberries, or getting out, they just love that. And little kids, you can get little dip spreaders. Like we had ours from Target, was like $1. And so if you have a snack and they can spread the whipped cream cheese or the hummus onto their cracker or whatever it is, when they have control, they're much more likely to be engaged in the process. And so cooking is wonderful. they're having fun, they're smelling, they're tasting, they're seeing the bright colors. Maybe they can just help wash and dump things and stir. And that's fantastic. And the only caveat I would say is, as with any other strategy or thing that we do to help them feel good about food, we can tip from being helpful and scaffolding and supportive into pressure. And I do see families sometimes tip into this where they're like, okay, now why don't you just kiss this, raisin before we put it in, because they learn that in feeding therapy. Or why don't you, you made this muffin, you have to try it. Let's tell me how good it is. And so just letting that agenda go of trying to use cooking to get them to eat.
Sure.
And again, it's trusting the process and the relationship and having fun. And if you baked a bunch of muffins and you don't want to eat 12 blueberry muffins, maybe you put them in a basket and bring them to the fire station or your neighbor who is alone and doesn't cook. So sharing that joy. Another thing I love for the really anxious eaters is making treats for animals. So I don't know if you ever talk about pet treats, but that's been really helpful with the really anxious eaters, because there's absolutely no expectation that they try an animal treat. So baking an animal treat with peanut butter or bananas or oats in it, they're still getting that exposure. And there's even one more level removed where they feel like, okay, they're not going to try to make me eat this. Because a lot of feeding therapy has been around food play that then gets spoiled with, okay, now we play with this, but now you have to lick it or kiss it, and then they push back. So so it's wonderful, wonderful. And just being aware of not letting it slide into that pressure.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, really a good litmus test for, is a strategy working, is it going to cause a power struggle, right? Is it going to cause the kid to run away from what you're asking them to do? That's clearly not serving anyone. And yeah, I've always been a huge proponent of telling parents the pressure is off in the kitchen. They know they're not being expected to eat, but I can see how that'd be a risk of sabotaging your efforts, but then consequently expecting them to eat it. So when you work with extreme picky eaters versus like just kind of the mild, like a sprinkle of picky eating, are the strategies very different, or does it really come down to sort of one foundation of how we treat human beings?
Yeah, that's what's so wonderful about this, is the strategy is really the same. And we have some accommodations that we might do if there's oral motor or neurodiversity issues. Certainly we can accommodate that. But this is what I love about this approach, is because responsive feeding relies on each individual doing best based on what I'm hungry for, what I'm curious about trying, with the support and with the planning. We can treat all of the children the same way. So a picky eater, an adventurous eater, a kid in a bigger body, a kid in a smaller body. Some of the worst, the most heartbreaking scenarios are siblings where one is bigger and one is smaller, and parents have been told, get this one to eat more, get this one to eat less. And every meal ends in tears for all of us is like not an uncommon thread, because that feels horrible with two children, and you're giving milkshakes to one and telling the other that they can't have them. And so that's not sustainable. And I think that's part of why family meals fall apart, because if we're always fighting, humans don't do what feels bad. And so then we end up retreating with our food into our separate spaces, and one kid's eating their food in their room in front of the screen. And we lose out on that important time for connection and exposure to different foods. So I love it, because the same basic underlying philosophy and respect for autonomy and for the relationship is across the board.
And, it really decomplicates things. I can't imagine how exhausting it is for parents to constantly be negotiating and figuring numbers. And overall, Dr. Rowell, what I feel like I hear you're saying is that 4 things, right? The children need autonomy. We need to respond to them and watch their cues. We need to have connection, physical and emotional, social and emotional connections. We want to make sure we don't moralize language around food and cause shame and make it a moral issue, because I love the way you say like fast energy and slow energy instead of good foods or bad foods or fun foods or growing foods, right? Those are all sort of moralized language. And finally, that litmus test of, does it cause a power struggle? Because if it's causing a power struggle, it's not autonomous, it's sabotaging connection, right? It could be causing blame and shame. And so that's really, that's really that foundation, is avoiding those power struggles. What's there's so many good strategies in this interview. What's your final message of hope for parents?
Oh, sorry. Well, I'd add one last thing to your 4 is having those reliable structure and meal times, because that is part of letting the anxiety go. Is I know I'm going to be fed regularly and have enough filling, tasty, satisfying variety of food. So the structure is another piece of that, because it's not just a free for all. So, there's, but all of that within the framework of meals and snacks and being able to learn. And I do hope it's a hopeful message. I mean, I've been there. This was such a transformative journey for me to go through. And I think to be kind with yourselves, that we all grew up in a culture that was very messed up around food. And so we are struggling with our own issues. As I mentioned, I since feeding my daughter, that was kind of the inspiration to work on some of my own issues. So, to be kind with ourselves is this, where we're struggling, where we feel those emotional, where we feel those conflict points. That's where we can learn more, and that there is hope. I do a lot of work with foster and adoptive families, and I've seen 17-year-olds coming into families eating less than 5 foods, who within a few years are pretty darn typical eaters. There's obviously, when there's trauma and real struggle, that has lasting implications, but it's not too late. If you have a 10-year-old who's sweets preoccupied, or a 3-year-old where you feel like you're just on a bad path, it can be turned around. And I don't know if I said this before, but many of folks listening today will take a few things that they hear and things are going to be so much better and transform. Others will need to maybe learn more, get some more support, get into some resources that I'm happy to share with you, because it can be really hard if you say, "Ooh, I'm going to try dessert with dinner," but you're still fighting about other stuff, and there's still pressure, or there's still restriction. And then I have parents say, "Well, I tried it, but it didn't work. I tried it for 3 days and it doesn't work." Right. And so I want to just caution families to that this is a long-term healing process. The younger they are, the faster it goes. And also, the first signs of progress will be happier people at the table, less negotiating, less anxiety, and to really soak in that feeling of being able to connect and maybe worry less, and that the food stuff comes a little bit later. So it might be 3 or 6 months before they're asking for lettuce on their hamburger or whatever, or they're leaving food if we've been restricting them, where they hand over that half-finished ice cream dish. But I would just encourage everyone listening that there is hope, and that it feels really good when it gets figured out. There's less fighting and negotiating and frustration. So I hope that's a good, helpful, hopeful final message.
It is a message of hope, because and more, I think feeding experts are pulling parents away from this idea that picky eating is about the food, right? Really, picky eating, we think it's about the food. We think the only success is food passing lips, going into stomach. But as you said, that's farther down the road. That is neither the root cause nor the first sign of progress. So thank you so very much, Dr. Katja Rowell, author, MD, mom, picky eating, feeding expert, so many titles and so many hats, and so many great strategies that you brought to us. And really, even beyond strategies, just the ways of thinking, right? We parents, we have to sort of pull our brains out of archaic ways of thinking that aren't serving us, or even new ways of thinking that aren't serving our families, and be willing to shift. And I'm probably in that boat with the whole sugar and desserts thing. It'll be a conversation this week. My husband will be like, "Oh, he did another interview? Come on, we got to change things again." Like, "Yep, honey, we do." It's always shifting. But thank you so very much for your time.
Welcome. Thank you.